One is just a thank you to everybody and to our panelists and to all of you that are joining us tonight. My name is Father Hal Rourke, and I am the rector, which means the priest in charge of the Church of the Good Shepherd at Granite Springs. It's our privilege and our pleasure to offer this educational forum and to thank our esteemed panelists who will be speaking tonight, and to all of you with all the other activities that you have to sort of join us to educate yourself. I know I am in need of that as well in terms of LGBTQ plus issues, and so thank you so much. We are a wonderful parish in Granite Springs and Somers. We have wonderful services at 8 and 10 and just finished them. They were fabulous this morning, and we would be honored to have all y'all be a part of that. And so we welcome you and we honor you. I just want to, we had recently our bishops were gathered in Texas, and on March 19th, interestingly, the timing and the synchronicity, they put out this statement. Here's what they said. In light of the baptismal covenant's promise to see Christ in all persons, and the recent and any actions by elected officials in Texas, Alabama, Arizona, Idaho, Iowa, New Hampshire, Michigan, Missouri, Florida, Arkansas, Ohio, North Dakota, Mississippi, South Dakota, Nebraska, Indiana, South Carolina, and any other states, municipalities, and school districts targeting transgender children and their families. We, the bishops of the Episcopal Church, gathered at Camp Allen, Texas in March 2022, voice our love and continued support for all persons who identify as transgender or non-binary and their families. We decry legislative initiatives and governmental actions targeting trans children and their families. We urge all in our church to create safe spaces and shield all people from harassment based on gender identity. We'll learn more about those legal issues tonight. Thank you all for being here. Julia, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Father Hal. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second Educate Validate seminar. Thanks for joining us today. This seminar is the one that's going to be all about LGBTQ plus issues in politics and the law. We are fortunate enough to host 6 amazing speakers today who will each present for 10 minutes about both the issue overall and their individual experiences as related to LGBTQ plus in politics or law. First, we'll host 3 speakers to discuss LGBTQ plus in the law: New York State Supreme Court Justice James Heyer, attorney Kristen Prada-Browd, and the former Yonkers City Council Majority Leader Michael Sabatino. After these presentations, we'll have 3 speakers discuss LGBTQ plus in politics: New York State Senator Peter Harkum, Consumer Protection Director of Westchester County Jim Maisano, and former Austining Mayor William Hanauer will close out the day. After all of the presentations are finished, some of the speakers will stay afterward to answer any questions. You speakers are welcome to stay after for questions if you want to, but we also completely understand if you are busy and unable to. If you think of questions during the seminar, please type them in the chat and we will answer them during the Q&A. And if you don't want the question to be public, please direct it to Megan Whalen and she will read it aloud anonymously at the end. And with no further ado, I'd like to introduce the first speaker, Honorable New York State Supreme Court Justice James L. Heyer. He serves as New York State Supreme Court Justice for the 9th Judicial District, which includes our own Westchester County. Before serving as a judge, Justice Heyer assisted with a wide variety of cases covering many issues, including discrimination and civil rights violations and LGBTQ plus issues. Justice Heyer, please feel free to add more of a description, and thank you. You're muted.
You're muted.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for inviting us here today, Julia. I'm so happy to see so many friends this evening that are on the screen and to see people from the community coming together. This is an important topic, and I'm grateful for being part of the conversation. As you indicated, I am a New York State Supreme Court Justice in the 9th Judicial District, which includes the counties of Westchester, Rockland, Orange, Putnam, and Dutchess. And I'm the only openly LGBTQ person to serve in that role in the 9th JD in history. I also currently serve as the president of the Westchester County Bar Association, and we're celebrating our 125th anniversary year this year. I'm also the only LGBTQ person to ever sit in that position as well. As I've been asked to discuss the broad topic of LGBTQ people and the law, I want to take the opportunity first to discuss the concept of what constitutes the rule of law, which I believe is a good foundation for the larger conversation. The United States court system defines the rule of law as a principle under which all persons, institutions, and entities are accountable to laws that are publicly promulgated, equally enforced, independently adjudicated, and consistent with international human rights principles. While there are a number of definitions of this important principle, this definition is particularly compelling to me as it stresses the importance of a number of key factors which I believe are important to a society and citizens having faith in the legal system. Transparency as to the nature of the legal system and the laws of that system, enforcement without bias and prejudice, an independent judiciary, and alignment with principles of human rights and civility. It's without question that these core elements of the rule of law cannot exist. Well, without these core elements, the rule of law cannot exist. And I believe it's appropriate to say, without the rule of law, there would be an erosion of our society as it serves as the cornerstone of all of our important institutions which enable our democracy to successfully function. When the rule of law does exist in a society, it then facilitates those within the community feeling confident that when they have a dispute that requires court intervention, they will be able to utilize the court system where they will be heard, treated fairly, and that the decision rendered will be just. I'm pleased to note that it's my belief that the New York State legal system and courts have made significant efforts to ensure that the rule of law not only exists, but has an unwavering commitment to the LGBT community. And I just want to take a moment to highlight a few examples. First, there's an abundance of continuing judicial education classes for judges and continuing legal education classes for attorneys, which are focused on issues pertaining to the LGBT community within the state of New York. Moreover, the need to address implicit bias, discrimination, and other important topics gave rise to CLE credits, now including those focused on diversity and inclusion. This only happened a couple of years ago when the New York State Bar Association House of Delegates, that includes representatives from the legal community throughout the state, discussed the need for diversity and inclusion to be added to the annual requirements for lawyers and their educational requirements. I'm very proud that I was part of the House of Delegates during that process, and that it was, I don't want to say unanimously adopted, but it had a majority in the House of Delegates and was adopted by the court system soon thereafter. Second, the ethical rules governing the conduct of attorneys and judges, both within and outside the court system, the courtroom, prohibit any conduct that would allow for bias or discrimination against the LGBT community. Third, the rules governing the manner in which judges run the courts include requirements that they not only prohibit anybody from engaging in discriminatory conduct or bias within the court, but that they prevent others around them from doing so, such as attorneys, court staff, and parties appearing before them. Kristen Browdy might discuss this later, but she and I, along with the incoming president of the New York State Bar Association, published an article dealing with transgender rights within the court system, particularly dealing with pronouns and essentially giving parties that are transgender that come before the courts the right to be heard and respected. And maybe she'll discuss that later, but I want to be brief and move along. Fourth, the visibility of the LGBTQ community within the New York State courts and greater legal community is vibrant and growing. In New York State, we actually have something that's quite particular and important. We've got the Richard C. Fiala LGBTQ Commission, which was established as the first permanent statewide LGBT commission for any court system within the state of New York. This commission on a yearly basis does a needs assessment statewide, and representatives from the commission travel the state to go to every judicial district to determine what the needs of our community are, and to improve how the court system interacts with the LGBT community. So we were the first state, and I believe we're still the only state that has such a commission. There's also a Gay Straight Alliance in the New York State courts. This was formed by my friend Mark about 2 decades ago, and it works with LGBT folks inside and outside the court system to make the courts more accessible to the community. There's also vibrant legal professional organizations. There's Legal, the New York State LGBT Lawyers Association, the National Trans Bar Law Association. There's the LGBT Judges Association for the state of New York, and one nationally. And these organizations do great work to provide scholarship opportunities to LGBT students, to provide clinics, workshops, and seminars. I'm a member of the Judges Association, and I can tell you that these judges are steadfast in their commitment to provide opportunities for younger people who are interested in seeking positions in the judiciary. So specifically from the LGBTQ community. So it's a wonderful thing that it exists. I want to conclude by stating without reservation that the LGBTQ community has made significant advances to ensure equal access to law within the state of New York, but there is room for improvement. Currently, the New York State court system has established an access to justice program. Its mission statement is to ensure that justice in all of the New York State courts for people of all backgrounds, incomes, and special needs by using every resource, including pro bono programs, self-help services, and technological tools by securing stable and adequate not-for-profit and governmental funding for civil and criminal legal service programs. I recently became part of this initiative, and I can tell you that there's programs throughout the state of New York, in particular in the 9th JD, that not only look to the LGBT community, but they look to a number of historically underrepresented communities to make sure that the court system is being receptive to their needs. And I can tell you that in the 9th JD, there's an LGBTQ program that's being established now, and that'll be announced shortly into the future. I wanted to end with a note. Just 43 years ago, in 1979, Stephen Locks became the first openly gay judge in California, and he was the only, at that time, openly gay judge anywhere in the world that was known at that time. And then a year later, Mary Morgan became the first openly lesbian judge. Taking this into perspective, within the span of 4 decades, the LGBT community has really come a long way. And I think it really says a lot that we're here today with people like Bill Hanauer, with Michael Sabatino, Robert Voorhees. These are truly pioneers and people that over the years I've come to know as friends. But we really owe them a lot because frankly, with their good work, people like me were able to get elected. And, you know, as we see, and I can't talk politics, but with determining who are going to sit on the courts of the states and federal levels, it's important that we have representation because young people and people in the community need to see that the courts are reflective of who they are. So I'm proud to be the first LGBTQ Supreme Court judge from the 9th JD. Being part of things like this was something that I committed to when I campaigned. So again, Julia, I want to thank you for doing this, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justice Heyer. Thank you. Our second speaker of the evening is going to be attorney Kristen Pratt-Rowdy. She is co-chair of the National Trans Bar Association and the immediate past president of the board of the LGBT Bar Association of Greater New York, on the steering committee of the New York State Council of Women and Girls and the Westchester County Women's Advisory Board. She served on many boards in the local community as well. Ms. Browdy has worked on many campaigns, including her own, and will share all of her other accomplishments with us today as well. Thank you, Ms. Browdy.
Thank you. And thank you, Jim Heyer, a good friend, and I'm delighted that he has been elected to a position of great, not just authority, but of great significance in terms of its symbolism, because Judge Heyer is exactly right when he says that for people to have confidence in the law, they have to know that they're going to be respected and reflected in the people who are sitting up there making decisions about their cases. And it's great that we have our first openly gay justice. But as an out trans lawyer, I would point out that in the United States, There are only 4 out transgender lawyers. There has never been anyone transgender elected to any position in our supposedly progressive state. Part of that's my fault because I lost 2 election races, but the reality is that there's still a lot of work to do, as Jim recognizes, and we're grateful to those who have come before us for getting us to the point where we can actually credibly run races and credibly try to elect openly LGBT people. But as you're hearing, I'm here to talk about the law. And it turns out that the law and the politics are inextricably intertwined. Absolutely impossible to separate them out. And what do I mean by that? Well, we're very privileged in New York because through the work of people like Pete Harkum and Mr. Maisano, who you will surprisingly hear is a terrific ally. He's a Republican. And we're conditioned to think, because of what Republicans in other states have been doing, that all Republicans are problems. I can tell you that when we were lobbying, long before there was a ban on conversion therapy in New York State, here in Westchester County, when Jim Maisano was a legislator, there were 4 Republican legislators in the 17-member body. Pete Harkum, by the way, is a former chair of that body, now a state senator. But there were 4 Republicans, and I was one of those lobbying, as was Mr. Sabatino and many, many others. And every one of those Republicans lined up with us, every single one. The vote to ban conversion therapy in the Westchester County legislature was unanimous. The politics matter. And when we hear a welcome from a church and the bishops in a church have come out strongly in favor of equality, that's thrilling news, because we know for far too long that our biggest problem has come from people in churches, people who say they are religious leaders, people who say they are Christians. And I'm not a Christian, never have been, probably never will be. But from what I've learned in years of study of philosophy is that these people who are preaching against equality under the law are anything but representative of what that faith says it's about. So delighted. But that's what building the law is all about. It doesn't come about in a vacuum at all. The Attorney General of the state of Texas has just sent a letter to the school board in Austin, Texas. He has said that he believes by them holding a pride celebration, they are violating the law of the state of Texas. Now, frankly, that's BS. He has come out with the guy's under indictment, but he's running for re-election. And somehow he never seems to, when you're the Attorney General, apparently in Texas, you can avoid going to trial when you're indicted, but don't know how that works. But every one of these battles that is a legal battle starts in the political sphere, starts with electing people who you can trust to support equality. As we know, Senator Pete Harkum has consistently. I've been delighted to work with him over the years, and he has been a champion for us. So it's really hard to separate that out. Where does the law end and the politics begin? Turns out that except when Jim Heyer's ruling on a case and he puts the politics aside and looks at the law and the facts of the case, the politics is really vital because that's what forms our laws. And that's why, as an out trans person, I've spent most of today running from Pride, or Trans Day of Visibility is the 31st. It's a day on which we say proudly to the world, hey, we're here, and I don't care whether you think we're winning too many races. I don't think you care whether you think that we are too public. We are here, and we are not going anywhere. You may have seen, even here in New York State, some right-wing folks and so-called religious leaders going after books in your school libraries, saying that they're afraid that discussion of being LGBTQ might make kids gay or make them transgender. To which I would say, if that's true, why am I not a very hungry caterpillar or a pigeon trying to drive a bus? It's nonsense, but that's the kind of crap that we're having to put up with. All of us are having to put up with. And I assume that if you're here, you're not part of that, which is great. So what can you do to make sure that the law matches what your expectation is, to make sure that the law complies with our notions of equality under the law? Because that's what it all comes down to. You know, being out as an LGBTQ person does not make you a better person. It does not make you a good person or a bad person. It simply makes you a more authentic and generally happier person. And in my case, it made me a hell of a lot better dressed. But what does it mean to you if you're an ally? Well, what it means is that you, like we, have so much work to do to make sure that the FALA Commission in the court system continues to do its work, to make sure that we elect judges like Jim Heyer, senators like Pete Harkum, representatives in the legislatures like Mr. Maisano was. And as a vice chair of the Democratic Party in Westchester County, I'll probably get in a bit of hot water for saying that a Republican turned out to be one hell of a legislator, but he did. And he is still serving the people of Westchester County and the state of New York, and we're grateful for that. But you have to look beyond the party label. You have to look at what the person is going to do. What can you trust them to do? What are they saying? Are they saying they want to purge the library of books about you? Are they saying that, oh my God, you know, one transgender swimmer won one race in the 22 years that transgender athletes have been allowed to compete, and now this means the end of the world has come? If that's what they're saying now, that's what they're going to do in office. And I apologize for straying all too much into the other panel's work, but that's what I would say to you. When you're thinking of rights under the law, you need to be sure that the law says what it is supposed to say. And Jim Heyer was right to highlight that the New York courts are very solid on proper use of pronouns and proper respect for those people who come before the court, at least in most of the districts, not in all yet, but we're working on that. And you may have heard that transgender rights and equality was very much before the US Supreme Court a couple of years back. And we had the decisions in the Bostock, Zarda, and Amy Stevens, which is known as R.G. Harris Funeral Homes case, in which the words, "You can't discriminate on the basis of sex," meant transgender people can't be discriminated against because they don't meet the norm that is expected, a gender stereotype that is expected. That's discrimination. When Amy Stevens got fired from the funeral home because she came out as transgender, that was discrimination. It was unlawful. She died before she got to see that decision before the US Supreme Court. It's our job to make sure that no other litigants face that same fate, that their rights are upheld now. And I'm grateful to Jim Heyer, to Jim Maisano, and to Pete Harkum and everybody else for joining together in that work. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Browdy. Now our next speaker is going to be former Yonkers City Council Majority Leader Michael Sabatino. Mr. Sabatino was elected to the City Council in November of 2011 and was the first out gay elected official in the city. He became Majority Leader in January 2018. Mr. Sabatino has also served in and founded many committees in Yonkers and has been a significant advocate for human rights and LGBTQ+ rights in many fields. Mr. Sabatino, please feel free to add on to that, and thank you.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you for putting this program together. I'm sitting here with my husband, Robert. We're together 43 years and got married 25 years. We had to wait 25 years to get legally married. And I'm going to talk about the law in the respect that we were in a marriage equality case. We were advocates in the Marriage Equality USA and Marriage Equality New York. we set out in 1999 to change the laws of the state and of the country with regard to marriage equality. And I'll be honest with you, we had to educate our own community as well, because some people would say, well, why do we want to participate in an institution for straight people? So we had to educate everybody on how the laws were discriminatory towards same-sex couples, and there were many. Many of you may not know that there are 1,138 federal rights, and there's about, I think, 2,400 state rights that you get when you marry. Most people don't think about it because they just automatically get them, and it's, you know, they don't have to think about, well, can I visit my spouse in the hospital? Can I make a decision for their medical, medical health? So there are many, many, many issues that come with marriage. And we were not going to settle for civil unions because we've been down that road before. The same is not equal. It's important that we have access to the same laws, and we would not have been protected by a civil union. So we went to Canada in October of 2003 to marry, because we couldn't marry here. When we came back from Canada, our marriage was not recognized. We actually shared a reception hall with a military couple from Ohio. So when they stepped across the border back in the US, their marriage was recognized, ours was not. In 2006, our then county executive, Andy Spano, issued an executive order recognizing marriages that were legally performed in other jurisdictions. As a result of that, 3 residents of New Rochelle sued the county executive, saying he had no right to give rights to people who were same-sex couples that were married. So we were approached by Lambda Legal, which is a organization that litigates for LGBTQ issues. We were approached and asked if we would intervene in that case and be plaintiffs in that case. That case was Godfrey v. Spano. The Godfrey comes from the person who was suing County Executive Spano. So we became participants in that case. We had about 10 to 12 pro bono lawyers. In 2000, 2006, 2007, almost 2008, we won the trial case. In 2008, we won the appeal case. And in 2009, we won the High Court of New York, the Court of Appeals. We won that case. So they declared that any marriage in a same-sex couple that was performed legally in another jurisdiction needed to be recognized in the state of New York. So we became one of, if not the first couple, to have our marriage actually recognized in the state of New York. But of course, we didn't finish there. We still had to get New York State to legalize same-sex marriage. So we did a lot of lobbying, like Kristen said, the politics and the law, it often gets mixed. So we continued to lobby. In 2009, there was a vote in the legislature in New York, and we won in the assembly, but we lost by a few votes in the Senate. So we had to continue our fight, educate not only the people in our community, but also the elected officials about what rights we were not granted, and we wanted equal rights. So in 2011, the vote came up again, and that time we were successful in getting marriage equality in New York. Robert was the advocate that was representing marriage equality, and he literally was up in Albany almost every week, educating the legislators on the reasons that it was so important that we get marriage equality rights. And I guess I'll do the segue into the next speakers, because as a result of being so involved in lobbying and being involved in my community, I decided I was going to run for office. So I ran. I was not the chosen candidate. I primaried, and I was elected in 2011 to the Yonkers City Council as the first openly gay elected official in the city of Yonkers. And that had a significant impact because people that were my opposition kept saying, well, you know, he has a gay agenda. So I said, well, I really don't know what a gay agenda is. Am I going to fill the potholes with rainbow tar? Some people actually thought that was a good idea. But it changed hearts and minds. And the most rewarding thing was I was accepted and respected like anybody else. And being gay had nothing to do with the work I had to do as a council member. So I'll pass it off to those talking about politics.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of the people who spoke on the law. We really enjoyed all of your speeches. A reminder to all the participants to please, if you have any, put questions in the chat, either to everyone or with a direct message to Megan Whalen. And now we're going to move on to our set of politics speakers, starting with Pete Harkum. Pete Harkum was elected to the New York State Senate in November of 2018. Prior to his election, Mr. Harkum has had a distinguished career in public service, participating in many projects and initiatives. Prior to his service to New York State, Mr. Harkum served on the Westchester County Board of Legislators and was Majority Leader from 2010 to 2013. He has participated in many important initiatives, from environmental education to advocating for those in low-income housing. Thank you, Mr. Harkum, and please feel free to add on.
Well, thank you, Julia, so much. I'm just so humbled to be on such a powerhouse panel of people who have done such important and groundbreaking work, and folks who I've had the honor of working with and learning from, you know, and that's the important thing. We don't go into these jobs knowing everything. So, you know, we hope we have the right work ethic and the right values, but then we need to listen to folks who are smarter than we are on particular issues and be willing to be educated. So with me, it starts with the simple notion that in my office, everybody has a seat at the table. And when I ran for this seat, it was thought that the incumbent was not particularly open to everybody. And to me, diversity is our great strength. It's what makes the Hudson Valley such a wonderful place to live. Everybody's got a seat at the table. And, you know, since this is a spiritual organization, you know, for me, the God of my understanding loves everybody equally. We're all divine beings, and God loves us just the way we are and just the way we envision ourselves. And so to me, I'm going to support everyone in my community, and whether that's when white supremacists stuck inflammatory stickers on an LGBTQ bookstore in Peekskill, we brought the community together, the faith-based community, the nonprofit community, the political community, and we stood together and we denounced it. We have been running a series of symposiums called Hate in the Era of Multiculturalism, where we have community conversations around these issues. And I think one of the most powerful ones we had was one with only high school students, and it was filled with an auditorium of 200 other high school students listening to the issues faced by disenfranchised students. Very, very powerful. So that's kind of the personal side. What are you doing in the community to support folks? But then it's listening to what the loopholes, this is getting back to the law. It's interesting. They were going into politics. I'm going to go back to the law, is learning what the loopholes in the law are that are hampering full equality for folks. Things like gender, which in New York State prior to a few years ago, which we banned, was a policy that basically, based on your identity, you could be fired from a private sector job, which is just, abhorrent to the values that we hold in terms of equality. Conversion therapy that was already discussed as being outlawed in Westchester County, we did that in New York State. There's something called walking while trans, that police officers were arresting folks for prostitution simply because of the way they were dressed. That is not right. That is not fundamental equality. And that's why we outlawed that practice in New York State. Things like using proper chosen names on utility bills, or being able to go back to your birth certificate and put the name of your choice and the identity of your choice on your birth certificate. These are the kind of things that some of us may not think about on a daily basis, but all of the people on this panel have educated me about. And I'm just so honored that I've had the privilege to work with them and continue to work with them. And then there are other areas. I chair the committee on alcoholism and substance abuse. And so we deal with the state network of treatment providers, 1,700 of them, and we learn of the barriers to treatment. And oftentimes there are cultural barriers to treatment, particularly for LGBTQ youth who feel disenfranchised, who often have depression, other accompanying mental health issues. So we passed the statewide Council on Equity, which will now study what the systemic barriers are, particularly to groups like LGBTQ young people, so that we can appropriately adapt our treatment modalities to reach everybody in a way that is culturally appropriate to them. So there's always work to be done. We constantly need to keep chipping away, and when we hear things like other states, and it was alluded to, going back to Father Hal and Kristen, about banning trans athletes from sports, denying trans young people health care. Going back even a few years prior, the nonsense about not allowing trans people to use certain bathrooms. To me, this is really barbaric stuff. It's abhorrent to my values as a representative and as a father, and just as a person who lives in the community. Fortunately, we're not there in New York, but we always need to keep our guard up, because those voices are still in our community, those voices of hate and intolerance. And so we stand on the shoulders of pioneers like Michael and Robert, and it's our obligation to continue the fight for equality for all New Yorkers. And that's what we will continue to do, because it all goes back to that basic premise that everybody is got a right to be at the table, have a voice at the table, and that we're all divine beings worthy of love and respect and dignity. So thank you for inviting me. I'm just thrilled to be here. This is a great panel. I apologize, we're up in Albany, we're finalizing the budget, so I am gonna have to jump. But if you have questions, please, Julia will get them to me. I'm happy to answer them. But it's just so heartwarming to be with so many friends on this panel. And Julia, thank you so much. This is such an important conversation, and I really commend you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Harkum. I'd like to welcome our next speaker now, Consumer Protection Director Jim Maisano. Mr. Maisano became the director of the Westchester County Consumer Protection Department in 2018. And before accepting that position, Mr. Maisano was elected to 11 terms on the Westchester County Board of Legislators representing District 11, which is New Rochelle and Pelham. He was a strong proponent of independent and bipartisan government during his public service. First elected in 1997, Mr. Maisano has held various leadership positions. He has also practiced law for more than 25 years and served in the U.S. Marine Corps. Mr. Maisano, thank you for being here and feel free to add on.
Well, thank you so much, Julia. I'm really enjoying this, and it's a very excellent panel, and I'm learning as I sit here. Also, Kristen, thank you so much for those kind words. You choked me up a little bit. They were so nice. So thank you very much. So from my background, I grew up in Westchester County and went off to the Marine Corps, went to law school, came back home. I was a lawyer in Manhattan. I moved back in with my parents, and I got a crazy idea to run for mayor of New Rochelle in 1995. And that was my kind of venture into politics. And the funny thing about that was, as a human being, I mean, I always wanted to be a human being before I was a politician. I was very pro equality for gays and lesbians. I think part of it is I was a younger elected official. You know, I had lots of friends that were gay and lesbian. I certainly couldn't run for office and not support every single friend I had on the planet, not just people that were straight, but my gay and lesbian friends too. I wanted to support them when I ran for office as well. But the funny thing about it is when you run for mayor in New Rochelle, nobody asks your view on gay and lesbian issues. Like, it never came up. But that was my view, and people did ask me, and I did say it publicly. When I ran for mayor, this is interesting, in 1995, I was pro-gay marriage publicly. There was a lot of Democrats that weren't even pro-gay marriage in 1995, but I was. And I told everyone that asked, I never held back, but it didn't come up that much. And then I didn't win that race. But 2 years later, I ran for county legislator, and I did win that race, but it was just a funny tidbit on that. I filled out a questionnaire for the Empire State Pride Agenda, and I checked off that I was for gay marriage in 1997. And they called me to verify because they were so surprised they got that from a Republican. But I said, yes, I am pro-gay marriage, and they were so excited. They actually sent staffers to work on my campaign, which I thought was great. So I now was a county legislator, and now I started to get asked about gay and lesbian issues as a county legislator. And immediately when I got elected, an issue came up, and that was the Westchester County Human Rights Law, which Michael and Robert lobbied me on way back in the late 90s. As a matter of fact, I see them nodding, they remember. So quick story, the law gets proposed. It has not just, it's a human rights law that covers everyone. It has a whole section that we're going to put as a protected class in the law, gays and lesbians. And so it was very controversial, and not even all the Democrats were ready to support it when it first came out. So I got Andrea Stewart Cousins, who was then a county legislator, now the Senate Majority Leader, was pushing the law, came up to me one day and said, listen, I know it's going to be really hard for you, this issue, but if you could support it, that'd be great. I said, not only do I support it, make me a co-sponsor. I'm with you all the way. And she always said that that mattered a lot, because the Democrats felt a little awkward when you had this rookie Republican signed on with the Democrats supporting the law. So I worked hard on that legislation. I spoke out publicly throughout the county on it, that I was a Republican supporting the human rights law, including protections for gays and lesbians as a protected class, so they couldn't get discriminated for a job or employment. And at the end of the day, I brought 2 other Republicans with me when the vote was taken. So 3 Republicans did vote yes to the human rights law, and I was very proud to have been part of that, and it was a great part of my life. I will tell you that. So here's the interesting part of it. You know, I grew up Catholic, still practicing Catholic. I went to Catholic school. I tell you that because we're in a faith-based meeting here today, but I want to tell you a good story about that. When I was supporting this law, some people went to my parish priest and asked that I be removed as an usher. I was an usher, and they asked me to be removed as an usher. And it was like 4 people. And these same 4 people were ironically in the lawsuit Michael mentioned. One of the people that went to the priest was in that lawsuit. Talk about the irony. So my priest was fabulous. And that's something I was very proud of to this day. He told them that his reading of the Catholic Catechism is nowhere does it say that we support against gays and lesbians or anyone else for housing, employment. There's nothing in there. As a matter of fact, he actually read them in the meeting. A portion of this Catholic Catechism that recently been published said that the Catholic Church does not support discrimination against gays and lesbians on issues of housing and discrimination for employment and things like that. I tell you that because I read that on the floor of my speech when I voted, that I got from my priest. And not only did he call me, but the other priest called me and told me, you fight on and you support that legislation. So from a faith-based perspective, I was supported by my parish, which meant so much to me. The other thing about that was in that battle for the human rights law, the one thing I learned very quickly, I think Kristen was getting at that a little earlier, is I think people thought at that time in the late 1990s, 1990s, that all Republicans were against rights for gays and lesbian, trans. That wasn't true. Like lots of people called me who were Republicans said, I'm glad you're voting for that. I'm glad you're supporting it. A lot of Republicans, and my wife always used to say, that's because a lot of them have a member of their family that's gay, lesbian, or trans, and they may not be publicly out talking about the issue, but they don't want their family member discriminated against. And I always thought that was great too. A lot of people who were Republican said they supported me, which made me feel very good. So I continued working on gay and lesbian issues. I sponsored the domestic partner registry before we could have gay marriage. I sponsored that in the county government, and that passed. I also we amended the human rights law. I supported that with Lois Braun's to give some protection to transgender member of our community. So I kept working on the issue. I didn't stop, and it always was a piece of who I was. And it definitely shook up people in the Republican Party. There was someone that was so open. But to me, it was just a simple issue. And that was, if you live in a free society and you have laws, right? The laws have to apply equally to everyone. Imagine that age-old notion, right? I mean, the civil rights movement had to happen there. Gay, lesbian, trans people are still fighting for all their rights to this day. But to me, it was pretty basic. So I was very happy when New York State passed the gay marriage legislation. And of course, the Supreme Court took its action as well. So things I was out early on as a Republican, the entire society moved in that direction. Just one other funny story I wanted to tell you before my time is up. When I was running for office one time, after I did all these things as a legislator in gay and lesbian issues, the Conservative Party told me they weren't going to support me anymore, that I was out. No longer they're not going to endorse me anymore. So I said, well, can I come in and defend myself? Like, I agree with them on taxes and spending. I might not agree with them on social issues, but we have some things in common. So I went to the meeting, and I wish you all were there because it was really cool. Because they asked me to get up and explain how I could possibly be for all these rights for gays and lesbians. And I really thought it was one of my best speeches I ever made that not many people heard. And what I said was, I'm a little surprised. And I opened up with that. I said, I'm a little surprised. I really expected the conservatives to support all this legislation because all of you talk about all the time family values. That's a huge part of what you say. Well, that's what I'm doing. I'm fighting for family values for everyone. I really thought you were going to be on board. I mean, if you can't just say you're for family values for some people, you're either for family values or you're not for family values. So I'm for family values for everyone you're for, plus gays and lesbians and trans and everybody else. And the funny thing about that is I don't think many people agreed with me on the speech, but they endorsed me because I had the guts to get up and speak to them. And I always gave them a little credit too, that they did end up endorsing me because I had the guts to come and say all of that. That was a cool experience too, because, you know, it's easy to say you're for something, but you got to get out and fight for it. And you have to, doesn't matter who it is, you have to advocate. And I felt like I did that throughout my career. And my advocacy for gay and lesbian issues is something I'm very proud of because I was a little different, right? I took a stand in the Republican Party back in the 1990s. I know when there was a group for, Michael might remember the name, it was a marriage equality group that started in the 1990s in New York State. When I signed the pledge they said I was the second Republican in New York State to sign the pledge, and I beat most of the other county legislators, Democrat or Republican, which I thought I was pretty proud of. So anyway, I can't really comment on the Republican Party now because I'm not that involved in it, because I took a position in George Latimer's administration to head the Consumer Protection Office. I must say, when I look nationally, I'm not pleased with where my party is, but I'll still always be a Republican that speaks out for the rights of gays and lesbians and the trans community, and I'll never change that. So thank you for letting me come on this panel today and talk about it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Maisano. Finally, for our last speaker of the evening, we are proud to end with former Austining Mayor William Hanauer. His career in politics and legislation, he has lobbied for marriage rights and LGBTQ+ rights. Mr. Hanauer was chairman of the Union for the Performing Arts, was appointed trustee of the Village of Austining, and was elected by Austining to be the first openly gay mayor in Westchester history in 2006. Please feel free to add more, Mr. Hanauer, and thank you.
Julia, thank you for all of my colleagues on this panel. It's an amazing group of people, and the combined experience of all of us leads to what is happening today in the world and what we hope will be happening tomorrow. What we hope will be happening tomorrow for greater rights for everyone. I came out in 1964 in June, 5 years before Stonewall. I was 17 and had just finished my freshman year in college as a theater major. I was also working at the time as assistant scenic designer for an upstate New York opera company, where being gay was almost a condition of employment. I was lucky to be in a nurturing environment at work as well as at home. Not everyone was or even is today so fortunate. Many gay people preferred to remain invisible. If they came out or were outed, many were abandoned by former friends, co-workers, classmates, lost their homes, their jobs, their families, were disinherited by their parents, read thrown out. Many, especially teens today, still suffer that fate. We could not assemble peacefully. We could rarely eat dinner peaceably without police raiding restaurants known to welcome us. It was a time of rigid discrimination and violence against gay Americans. Police were particularly vicious. Raids and arrests were very frequent. Life for the LGBTQ plus Americans has changed dramatically since the early hours of June 28, 1969, when police violently raided the Stonewall Inn, a bar known to be a hangout for gay men and transvestites. Raids had been frequent, but this time something was very different. Led by drag queens, the customers fought back. They were ultimately arrested, but not before inspiring a series of spontaneous, mostly peaceful demonstrations by members of the gay community and allies nationwide. That event began the gay revolution, and on June 28, 1970, the first Pride March kicked off. I've marched in almost all of them, yes, with 7 of our 8 exchange student sons, gay or straight or questioning, only missing those when I was out of town, or the one that I was out of town. The gay community often measures time by Stonewall, before and after, as I did at the beginning. But even after, anti-gay bias, bigotry, and viciousness did not end. On June 7th, 1980, James Byrd Jr., an African-American gay man, was tied to the back of a truck by 2 white supremacist anti-gay bigots, dragged behind it, and decapitated in Jasper, Texas. Both men were convicted of first-degree murder and executed. On October 6, 1998, Matthew Shepard, a young gay man, was tortured, tied to a fence, and left to die by 2 young bigots on a frigid October night near Laramie, Wyoming. The men were arrested and tried. The attack was widely reported as being caused by Shepard's being gay. Blame the victim. Defense attorneys employed a gay panic defense. More demonstrations ensued across the country. The perpetrators were convicted of murder and received life sentences. The wheels of government grind exquisitely slowly. The Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act was signed into law by President Obama on October 28, 2009, as a rider to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2010, expanding the 1969 United States Federal Hate Crimes Law to include crimes motivated by the victim's actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender, or gender identity. But there is still no federal law prohibiting employment discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. And there is no state-level employment protection for sexual orientation in 28 of the 50 states, and no gender identity protection in 30 states. In New York State, it is now illegal for an employer, property owner, or realtor to discriminate on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression. But again, there is no federal law. Some states are enacting religious freedom laws that would allow religious institutions and business owners claiming to be religious to refuse service to LGBTQ people, jobs, weddings, wedding cakes, photos, flowers. On July 24th, 2011, after many years of political action by the LGBT community, civil rights organizations, unions, and some liberal clergy, and Governor Andrew Cuomo signed the New York State Marriage Equality Act. It passed the second time it came up for a vote in New York State Assembly. Only one Democrat in the Hudson Valley voted against it the first time. All Republicans did. I began lobbying for same-sex marriage as chairman of Unions for the Performing Arts, a legislative action coalition representing 21 entertainment industry unions. And as an individual from 1998 until 2005, and as trustee and finally mayor from 2005 until it passed. I am blessed and very happy to be benefited from its new rights in a public park in Ossining on June 3rd, 2012. In 2005, I'd been appointed trustee of the village of Ossining and sworn in with my then longtime companion by my side, holding the Bible. In 2006, I was elected mayor, the first openly gay mayor in Westchester history. I immediately tried to have anti-discrimination language included in the village code, alas to no avail. Some of the powers that be were convinced the village was not ready for that. I faced little opposition in my first 4 successful candidacies or my mayoralty on the basis of my sexuality. However, in my final campaign, there was an undercurrent of it, and one openly hostile comment on Facebook on a post of a photo of my husband, 2 of our exchange student sons, and me, captioned "Our Family." On June 26, 2015, the Supreme Court of the United States decided that the 14th Amendment requires states to license and recognize same-sex marriage. Today, 35 states and the District of Columbia have marriage equality laws. 15 still do not. On June 12, 2016, a 29-year-old homophobe killed 49 people and wounded 53 more in a mass shooting at Pulse, a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida. In the last 5 years, gay rights, along with all minority rights, no, all Americans' rights, were once again under attack. They still are. Catering to, or worse, encouraging the underlying negative attitudes did not end with the 2020 election. In the last year, there's been a proliferation of bathroom bans against trans people, 50 anti-trans sports participation bills, and denials of transition healthcare treatments, mostly targeting school-age transgender kids. Recently, the Arizona Senate voted to ban gender reassignment surgery for minors. Currently, the governor of Texas wants the provision of gender-affirming medical care by physicians and parents to be charged as child abuse. Texas is also trying to make puberty blockers illegal. Anti-gender affirming medical care bills have been introduced in 30 state legislatures. According to Friday's Washington Post, at least 168 bills have been introduced targeting the rights of and protections for transgender and gay teens, youth, and families. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the AIDS crisis. Were it not for activists like ACT UP, lobbyists, and the gay men's health crisis, the federal government would have continued to ignore AIDS as it did throughout the Reagan administration. Reagan himself refused to say the word, no less act to alleviate the suffering of hundreds of thousands of sick and dying Americans, their families and friends. Once when I was lobbying for federal action, Surgeon General C. Everett Koop showed me hundreds of thousands of copies of the Surgeon General's report in which he said that the use of condoms would stop the spread of AIDS. The president refused to fund mailing them out. It wasn't until late in Reagan's second term did the government begin in earnest to fund research. Although there are now treatments, there is still no cure for AIDS or vaccine against it. I lost a number of friends. The unions I represented lost hundreds of members. As of 2018, under the Trump administration, people in the armed services with HIV were banned from serving overseas, and anyone unable to go overseas was drummed out of the services. Eventually, despite the new medications that make HIV undetectable and untransmissible through sex, people with HIV were and are totally banned from our armed services. Don't Say Gay bills, which prohibit discussion of LGBTQ issues in schools or even the recognition of gays' existence, are proliferating in red states. There are at least 75 new bills targeting classroom discussions and library books. In some states across the country, there are moves to ban books that mention LGBT people or deal with LGBT-related issues or LGBTQ plus experience from school libraries. Yes, even nearby in Yorktown. These books are self-affirming for LGBTQ plus youngsters and should be destructive to anti-LGBTQ plus prejudice. For justice, to win the fight for civil rights, all Americans must unite in a nonpartisan effort. We, the voters and future voters, have the responsibility to elect officials who will lead the fight for the expansion of and the enshrinement of civil rights for all Americans. And we must continue the grassroots effort. Only in that way will all Americans finally meet our Stonewall moment. And speaking of Stonewall, I'm going to miss the march again this year. I'm going to be in Venice, yes, that Venice, with my husband, celebrating 10 years of legal marriage and 48 years as a couple. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanauer, and thank you so much to all of our wonderful speakers. We really enjoyed all of your speeches so much, and we're so grateful that you joined us today. And I'd like to conclude the presentations by saying a short statement in summary. There have been many shocking injustices through the history of LGBTQ+'s involvement in politics and law, but also a lot of incredible victories, thanks to the dedication and determination of countless individuals. Politicians, legal workers, and passionate citizens like us will continue to persist in fighting the discrimination and hate that still occur today, and it is essential to support and applaud their efforts. By being here today and listening to the speakers' stories, our community is becoming more loving and helping to make the world a better place. Now, to the speakers and attendees who cannot stay, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate you being here tonight, and we totally understand if you need to leave. And now on to the questions. We're going to read them in the order that they were received in the chat. So if you think of them now, feel free to add more. Yeah. Okay, so
yeah, we had a few questions that came in. The first one is Judge Heyer still here? Or did he leave?
I'm still here.
Oh, there he is. Good.
Great. So this one was to you in specific. It says, Do you see any other blue states supporting LGBTQ plus rights as New York State has done?
I can't discuss politics as a sitting judge, but I can say this, that I do participate in bar associations and judicial associations that are beyond New York State borders. And I'm happy to say that I think that there's a greater understanding of the need for diversity and inclusion as an access to justice issue in courts that are across the country. So we're seeing a positive shift in that way. The American Bar Association has published a number of reports dealing with the issue. So again, I think Bill Hanauer said it very correctly. It's not LGBT rights, it's really human rights. It's a broader construct. And I think that in the legal community, with judges and lawyers alike, that we acknowledge that and we're embracing that.
Okay, thank you. And this next question,
This was when Pete Harkum, State Senator Pete Harkum was speaking, but we can, if anyone can address it, if not, we will email it to him, but go ahead and read it.
so it says, what protections does New York State have for educators in educating students and colleagues about LGBTQ plus issues? And is there a difference when it comes to public versus private schools?
Jump in.
I don't. Oh,
Go ahead.
Go ahead,
Go
Kristen.
ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead. Chip. The state education law doesn't discriminate in any way that I'm aware of. That might be an interesting thing that we might need to put explicit protections in it. But as things stand right now, it's my understanding, and this is why we're fighting in places like Yorktown, because it is very much left up to the local school boards to determine curriculum beyond the basic core competencies that are required. And those are not gender specific in any way. Obviously, Title IX of the US Code, of the Civil Rights Act applies here. And Title IX guarantees equality in education and non-discrimination on the basis of sex. The very wording of the decisions in the cases 2 years ago in Zarda and Amy Stevens' case. But there's never been a test at the Supreme Court level of Title IX on exactly those grounds. So while the Zarda and Bostock decisions are instructive, they are not necessarily controlling. May not be the answer you wanted, but Michael, do you have additional language on that?
No, I think you're correct. I think the concern is because of some of the legislation that's been enacted in other states. And I think it's a good point. Maybe we have to codify that.
There was an extension of the question.
It says, furthermore, are there resources educators can make students and families aware of in the Hudson Valley?
There are. The Loft is the LGBT center in White Plains. Reaching down into the city, the Ackerman Institute has done programs up here in Westchester County and is available to any education system that wants to bring its trainers in. When I was coming out, the school system here in Chappaqua reached out and said, well, how do we train our staff? Because we've had transgender kids, but we've never had a trans parent. And we want to make sure your sons who are in the school system aren't bullied. And the Ackerman Institute did training for them, and it was quite successful. So I would highly recommend both the Loft and the Ackerman Institute as possible resources.
Also, Center Lane out of WJCS. Center Lane is a youth program for LGBTQ youth and their allies, and they do programs in the public schools as well.
Okay, thank you. Another question specifically for Mrs. Browdy is, what do the different flags behind you represent?
Thank you for asking that. Yeah. Okay. as I knock things over. This is a simple one. This is the transgender flag. This is your basic pride flag. And way in the back is sort of the one that meshes all of them. It is called the Progress flag. It's the one that's also on my shirt. And they are some of the flags you will see if you do attend, as Mr. Hanauer has, the Pride March. And I'm sorry he won't be with us, because this will be the first year that we're going to be able to have, I think, COVID willing, a full Pride in several years. So that's the flags. And Jim Maisano, if you're still here, I got a follow-up for you, pal. And it stems out of I'm so grateful to you for having stood up in your church. But the Pope calls me and those like me, and I quote, the annihilation of man. Well, no. But that's the thing we're fighting against. That kind of comment. And that's embedded in the Catholic Church, embedded in it. And it takes an immense amount of me holding back snark when it comes to not going directly after the Catholic Church, which Governor Cuomo, for all his faults, was absolutely right. When we were trying to pass legislation that was pro-equality, he would loudly proclaim that the biggest obstacle in New York State was the Catholic Church. It's why we were the last state in the nation to have no-fault divorce, because the Catholic Church opposed it. The influence of that church in this state remains immense. And I appreciate all you've done, but you got to get in there and let those folks know they've got more soul searching to do. That's the polite way of putting it. And I'm not usually that polite.
Unfortunately, I think Jim has left, but I will tell you, his experience was not the same experience that Robert and I have. We were thrown out of our Catholic Church choir the week after we get married. So we are now Episcopalians at Zion Episcopal in Dobbsbury. And my 89-year-old mother was received in the Episcopal Church because she said she wasn't going back. She was just going to go where her sons went. And I've been a warden, and now I'm back on the vestry. So it is unfortunate that the Catholic Church really hasn't went. I don't want to be into a Catholic Church bashing, but so many other religious institutions like the Episcopal Church are very accepting, and the damage and welcoming the damage that has been done in the past in some instances is not repairable.
Thank you. We have one more question.
It says, how far can states' rights go with the don't say gay legislation that's currently out there in states like Florida? What federal protections beyond free speech can rule this out?
Kristen, you want to take that one?
I'm sorry, repeat the question one more time. I was answering it.
I'll say it. Okay. How far can states' rights go with the don't say gay legislation that's currently out there in states like Florida? What federal protections beyond free speech can rule this out?
Title IX of the Civil Rights Act would seem to be the grounds. Equal protection as well. That and the fact that there are a whole bunch of us going down there saying gay, 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 gay. And nobody's shutting up. You may have seen the high school students of Florida who started walking out of schools, and the administrators going nuts over it. They suspended there was I think he's a junior who led this initially, and he's now probably running for office. And I'm going to be one of those contributing to that campaign. the students, the interesting thing is that there is such a difference between the attitudes of our generation, and I'm an old person. The only person here even close to my age is Michael. Our generation still thinks it's a question, thinks there's a debate to be had on equality when it comes to LGBTQ issues. The younger generation, to them, it's not a debate, it's just the way things are. And I can tell you how that played out when I came out. My youngest son was then going into 6th grade, 5th grader going into 6th grade. And we were all worried that he was going to get bullied and that there'd be a problem. And he was worried about it because his older brother said, oh, middle schoolers are tough. Middle school's going to be impossible. So he assembled the 8 closest friends he has who were the members of his competition Lego team, the Brick Squad, came over for a pizza party. And I overheard this because I was getting them the pizza. And he was like, okay, guys, I got to tell you something that don't give me a hard time about it. My dad's transgender. What do you think? And this is all 5th graders going into 6th grade. And the first 2 were like, transgender? What's that? The next one was, your dad is transgender? That is so cool. And you could just see him going, what? And the next 5 were all the same. It was like, okay, but where's the pizza? This generation doesn't care. They have trans friends, they have non-binary friends, they have gay friends, and they have straight friends, and they're just people to them. And when we get to there, when they're the voters throwing out the DeSantises and throwing out the Abbotts and the Kay Ivies who are signing these bills and passing these bills, it's game over. And the sooner that comes, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, go ahead.
I
Michael.
just wanted to mention that there's another organization that Justice Heyer just pointed out to me. It's GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. And they also work with schools, and there is a pretty active GLSEN group here in Westchester County.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
And
And
Rockland.
I feel like that's
Those are all
all
the
for tonight.
questions.
That's all the questions.
Mhm.
So thank you so much, everyone, for coming, speakers, and
Should we have a
Everybody
Zoom
else
round
as
of
well?
applause for our speakers? That was so good. Thank you so much. All right, good night, everybody.
thank you for coming. We hope you had a good time.